And we're recording. Let's do it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Riley. So for everyone out there, we are recording this and we will provide a recording after the meeting as well as the presentation slides. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to be here and to have this material presented today. I am Natalie DeFrance-Dreyer. I am a designer at OHPD and Deputy Chair of the Portland Green Schools Committee. The Green Schools Committee is a volunteer initiative. We work to promote healthy and sustainable school environments, and we're located here in Portland. We always enjoy having more participants and more committed members, so if you'd like to get involved, please reach out to us. You can find us on our website, and you can join our next meeting, which is coming up Friday, May 14th. There's our social links. So our presenters today are Aaron Pressberg. He's the Senior Program Manager of Energy and Sustainability at Portland Public Schools. We have Riley Loveland, she's Project Manager at New Buildings Institute. Ron Jaiwera, Associate Principal at PAE, and Forrest Tenier-Gesner also at PAE. Our presentation today is going to focus on the Portland Public School Sustainability Standards. They were developed to promote healthy and efficient facilities for students at the Portland Public Schools District. And today we'll kind of overview some of the goals and outcomes of those standards.
Thank you, Natalie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Aaron Pressberg with Portland Public Schools. So today we're kind of going to go over the introduction and background around the standards. Next slide, please, Natalie. So we're going to split this up into 3 different sections. So we'll start off with planning and process and what that looked like. And then we'll move into why did we develop sustainability standards, and in general, why should school districts develop standards? And then section 3 is about actually the content and just kind of a high level overview of the standards. Next slide, please. So kicking off the process. So this kind of started, you go back 1, please. So this kind of started with just keeping an eye on what other school districts are doing, and also just listening to our student voices. So back in 2016, our district passed a board resolution around climate justice and curriculum. So we were kind of already talking the talk on the curriculum side, but we wanted to align that with the facility side so that we could actually walk the walk on in terms of our buildings. And this is something that's very important to our students. So we kind of had that momentum going, and we're like, okay, well, we have it on the curriculum side, and let's just match that on the facilities and operations side. Next slide. So it started off with our goals. So we were looking at other districts like San Francisco, Boulder Valley, and some other large districts across the country. And we realized, okay, they're setting these aggressive goals around energy and sustainability. We should be doing the same. So this is how the conversation got started. So I'm not going to read these off to you, but you can see our baseline on the left, which is the 2018 to 19 fiscal year. And then we set these goals around energy, solar, water, and waste to be met by 2040. So this was kind of the brainstorming of like, okay, let's set these goals, and then we'll go from there. Next slide, please. So around this time, we had a new COO. He was formerly the senior director of our bond program. So he was very much familiar with the district. He had been working here for, I think, 9 years at the time. I'd worked with him in that role. So we knew each other, we had a good working relationship. And then he took the COO job, and I sat down with him and I said, hey, now that you're overseeing all these other departments, I have an idea. Let's, I think we can really come up with a really great standard here around energy and sustainability. And we started discussing it. And once we established the goals, we're like, okay, now what? What are the strategies? How are we going to meet these goals? We knew a piece of the equation would be through our bond and new construction, but we knew there was going to be other factors from facilities and maintenance and operations. So we sat down and kind of decided, okay, we need to come up with a standard and a guideline. It's going to help us strategize to meet these goals. So like I said, inspired by other districts, I had several conversations with the sustainability office at San Francisco Unified. I've also talked to staff at Boulder Valley. So, you know, they had these goals, they had these documents and plans in place. So, so I knew kind of the direction we wanted to go. As we started discussing internally, we were like, well, what does this look like? Is it a board policy? Is it design standards? Is it a SOP? Like, what exactly is this? We decided to keep it operations focused because we felt that we can control that, and much of our impact in terms of our carbon footprint comes from our operations, which is overseen by our COO. So we said, okay, let's keep it in that court, and we can you know, move through the process quicker and make some real changes. Another key to success is just kind of upfront communication. So when I was brainstorming with our CEO, we're like, okay, let's bring in all the department directors. So we're talking to transportation, we're talking to facilities, the bond program, maintenance, like the directors of all these departments, and saying, hey, this is what we're thinking. This is how it's going to affect your department. This is how it's going to help your department. Which is another key to success, is the symbiotic relationship of this document. I think people expect me to be like, hey, let's be more sustainable. Let's set UI targets. Everyone's like, yeah, you're the energy guy. Of course, you're going to say that. But I also wanted to make sure that I am making this a helpful guiding document for the project managers, because they're already doing things like having to go through commissioning on their projects. They're having to coordinate with Energy Trust of Oregon for incentives on their projects. So not only am I asking them to, you know, commit to these goals and standards, but I'm also saying, hey, here's a process guide for you to get these done through your projects on just steps that they're already having to take. So that brings us to our last point in developing the team. So we kind of discussed, okay, do we want to bring in some third-party expertise? So basically my CEO said, okay, this is great, you're going to manage it. And I was like, okay, that sounds great, but I'm probably going to need some help. I had already been working with Riley in various capacities, so I, you know, reached out to her, and I knew about MBI's, you know, data and research around zero net energy buildings and all their work with schools, especially in California. So I reached out to her. We started brainstorming, and it was very high level and nebulous and vague at the time. But as we started sitting down to brainstorm, Riley was like, hey, we should really talk to Verwan and bring in PAE. So, and the best part about that was I worked with Verwan, and PAE has done a lot of design work for PPS. So they did mechanical design at Franklin and other schools. So I knew that our bond team respected PAE and had worked with them. So bringing them in as like that technical expertise from that engineering, like real world background, was really helpful for me to get buy-in from the construction team.
And I think that's me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that, laying the groundwork there, Aaron. And I did want to remind everyone that you're welcome to start typing questions into the chat as we go on through, just so you don't forget them. Hold on to them if you like, but we'll get to them at the end. As Aaron said, I'm Riley Loveland, and I'm a project manager here at NBI. This one is my slide, right? I think so. I thought there was one in between, but I just want to make sure. Great, excellent. I work with a special focus on schools. That's the one I was looking for. And I know many of you here on this webinar, which is super exciting. So hello to all of you, and a special hello to anyone I have not met before. I'll have you go to the next slide, please. That leaf on that slide is beautiful. We were brought into this process early on, as Aaron said, you know, to talk to Aaron and PPS stakeholders about why these standards should be developed, what typically goes into them, and then the lessons learned from other districts that would be applicable to PPS. Aaron mentioned San Francisco Unified and Boulder Valley. There's a whole host of other districts that I will tell you about in just a second. And I do feel like I might likely be preaching to the choir here, since you all are here, you know, on Earth Day and curious about these standards, but likely some of this information will be relevant for your district or for the districts you're working with to achieve developing something like these standards. And for some background on NBI, we're a national nonprofit and we work to reduce energy and carbon emissions in both new and existing buildings. Sometimes we joke we should be called the Old Buildings Institute, not new buildings. And we've been working in the schools market for many years. And although we work nationally, we do reside right here in Portland. So as Aaron said, we have worked in various capacities. And when the opportunity to help PPS came around, it was clearly a no-brainer for us. Next slide. Excellent, thank you. So in 2010, NBI began tracking zero energy buildings. And at that time, few people really believed that a building could produce as much energy as it consumed or that they could be that energy efficient, but we knew it was possible because we worked with people who had done it. So we started tracking them. And in 2012, as you can see here on the left, we published our first list of zero net energy buildings. And we've continued to update this list every year. I really should have the most recent one on here. We have had a more recent one than 2018. So we knew that when Aaron expressed interest in sustainability standards and the high performance building goals, we had a data set to support the PPS agenda. Next slide. So, should district set goals and adopt struggling today. So what we're trying to get across here is why should districts set goals and adopt sustainability standards? It's because setting goals and standards holds district departments accountable to create the healthy and creative, productive learning environments. I feel like many of you have heard that, but having the actual documentation to do it is so important to hold everyone accountable. And that's because these high performance buildings, they deliver cost avoidance from the utilities that can go back into the classroom and possibly facilities. Generally, the cost avoidance from the utilities goes back into a general fund for kids, teachers, whatever you may need. They create these comfortable and productive learning environments. They prevent maintenance issues, and they provide that hands-on, that future-focused learning opportunity. And oftentimes we say future leaders, but it's actually for current leaders. All of these students in our schools are our current leaders, and that results in stronger, more resilient communities. And ultimately, because our students are our current leaders, they are demanding it, as seen here in this photo. Next slide. So setting high standards, goals, and aiming towards zero leads to things like better occupant health outcomes, and the data really supports it. There is a huge multitude of data supporting why these buildings need to exist. Next slide, and why we need to do this for our buildings. So setting goals and utilizing the standards like these at PPS, like I mentioned, holds all future district construction departments accountable. It also sets a standard for other school districts, maybe a city, maybe a county, so that everyone in the full community is creating the healthy and productive learning environments. And the standards provide project teams with that energy and sustainability guide for all projects. So if you're a district or you're working with a district looking into adopting standards, your standards can include specific information about, your overall process, your HVAC, water, plumbing, lighting, plug loads, kitchen, solar, renewables, commissioning. Really, the limit is endless. We'll talk a little bit more about what's in the PPS ones, but I just kind of wanted to frame that with a list. And as I mentioned earlier, other districts have adopted similar standards. Next step, or slide, not step. It's important to note too that, PPS is not the only one on this path. I suspect many of you know this, but as you can see, schools are leading in getting to zero energy, carbon neutrality, and really just sustainability overall. I know zero energy can be kind of scary. Carbon neutrality can be scarier. Sustainability can even be iffy, but really we're just leading the path towards making it more mainstream and more normal. And that's because they're these ideal, visible community building types to enact change and showcase that better design and decision making. Next slide. I was hoping some of these school districts would be on here, but I don't see anybody today. But shout out, this is only a small list, but this is a national movement. You can see Salt Lake City on here, Seattle Public Schools, New York City, LA Unified, Philadelphia. I'll have you go to the next slide really quickly. Yes, hey Graham, what's shaking? Seattle here, I like it, excellent. And there's even more. Other districts setting the standard for sustainability. They do it in different ways because every school district is unique. We recognize that every school district has specific, funding issues, specific net metering. I mean, the list goes on, but there are ways to do it for each and every school district. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the keys to success that I will kind of hammer home before I pass this on is standards like this. It's something we call energy efficiency or getting to zero over time. We say energy efficiency here, but typically we call it getting to zero over time. And NBI has been in this market researching for years and have learned that the concept of getting to zero, the over time, is this really successful and important approach because it takes a long-term strategic approach to energy management where the main focus is on the benefit to the learning environment. So you're leveraging every opportunity to improve energy performance in the building life cycle. It could be anything from a lighting retrofit, an equipment replacement, something bigger like a modernization or new construction. And districts like PPS are setting measurable goals for their portfolio and individual projects by using policies and the guidance documents, such as these standards, to achieve these goals. And you can use these goals too to regularly report on progress so that you're continually understanding where you are and ratchet down towards that zero or that very sustainable goal and be energy efficient as possible. I think I have 2 more slides. Yeah, excellent. And remember that energy efficiency, I love the chat. This is excellent. Remember that energy efficiency is your least cost resource because, of course, more efficient buildings equals less demand on the grid during peak hours, which saves you money because then you don't need more renewables on or off site. You're not actually paying for more utilities. And so working towards ratcheting down that least cost resource for the district is really, really important. So using a document like a standard to continually do that is really the best way to approach it. One more. Dig in the chat back and forth, you guys. Keep it up. And I know that cost is a tricky thing. So often when I say things like energy efficiency is your least cost resource, immediate reactions are, like, well, how do I pay for that? How do I pay for energy efficiency? But a key aspect of the standards that saves money up front and in the long run is that you can use these standards to cost energy efficiency into your bonds. And if it's costed in, then teams hypothetically cannot value them out when it comes time to construct. You can minimize your air leakage and right size your HVAC equipment because that's into the standards. You don't have to pay for more equipment or equipment that's using energy because it is, there's too much going on. Simplifying your controls. You have other free resources like daylighting and airflow, passive measures. You can reduce your electrical service size. And then there's also trade-offs. There's different things, you might want that more insulated window, but it actually might be more cost effective to go for just a little bit more PV. So that's the big why. All of you districts that are here or people working with districts that might be interested in something like this. This is actually a very similar messaging to what we presented to the PPS facilities team to get that stakeholder buy-in. So it's really important to set the why and address any barriers such as costs. I had to pull that in there head on. So I have talked a lot. And now that I've painted this picture about why these standards were developed and where else it's happening and just kind of the overall process of getting your goals, I'm gonna actually turn it over to PAE.
Hey, thanks, Riley. Actually, we've gone through this pretty fast, so I'm gonna slow it down. Hey everybody, I'm Ruan Jairira. I'm an associate principal mechanical engineer here at PAE, and I'm along with Riley and Natalie and Forrest and Aaron. I'm on the Portland Green Schools Committee as well. So yeah, for all of those folks that joined a little bit later after the intro slide. So what we're gonna talk about at this session is kind of, Aaron went through the process of PPS, what he had to get through, his mindset of, how we get the standards developed, and then Riley really talked about the why. Why should a district like PPS have a sustainability standard? I mean, I think it's good to note, and Aaron probably will talk about it later, but this falls in line with the tech specs and the ed specs, so it's part of the standards. So it's a requirement that all the design teams, such as yourselves, when doing a project in the future, is going to have to meet, or I guess ask for variance, right? So it's a good thing. But so in this session, we're going to really talk about what went into developing the standards and really giving a high level outline of what those standards and requirements are. And then for those of you that really want to dive into the details of what that standard says, we're going to have the second session in May, diving into the details and how we think you can meet that standard and so on. So next slide. So a little bit about PAE. So when Aaron gave me a call and said, "Hey, Ron, can you guys help out with this process?" And we were pretty excited. If you go to the next slide, Natalie. PAE, for those of you haven't worked with PAE or don't know us much, but we're a triple bottom line company, right? And I'm sure most of you know about that. But it means that we put people and planet on equal footing to profit when making business decisions or any kind of decisions that affect PAE, right? That's at the project level and at the corporate level, right? So from a perfect match standpoint, like Riley said, just like Riley, I was like, this is awesome, right? This is the opportunity to really work with one of the biggest school districts in our community and help them develop a set of guidelines to improve their sustainability over time. Not only does that help, the planet side of things from our standpoint, but also the people standpoint from a social equity lens, right? So we were really interested in getting involved and helping out on this project. Next slide. So a little bit about PAE. We're your traditional mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers, but we do also have technology design. So security, AV, so on. We have architectural lighting design through Luma. We do building analysis and modeling, which is your traditional energy modeling, sustainable design, and we do sustainable master planning as well. And next slide. We can say we're a triple bottom line company and just kind of talk about it, but we're also leading the way in really living buildings and LEED Platinum projects and passive house and net zero. So really this project was in our wheelhouse and we were really excited about getting to it. So let's talk about how we got to it, right? So next slide. So let's step back a little bit. I think most of you will know this already, but just make sure we are all on the same page. So when we talk about energy, we're going to focus on the energy aspect of those 4 guiding criteria that Aaron talked about. We talk about what's called EY, right? Energy use intensity. It's the yearly thousands of BTUs that the building uses divided by the building's gross square footage. That gives you this miles per gallon, right, for buildings. So it looks at both electric and gas, if there's gas or any kind of fuel consumption on an annual basis, and normalizes it on a square footage. So you can compare different types of buildings to see how they match up in terms of energy usage. Next slide. So one of the first things we did was we looked at the existing stock of buildings that Portland Public Schools has. So throughout the entire portfolio, we went through and looked at their energy use indexes, their EUIs. So we kind of graphed it. And it should be noted, by the way, that Aaron and his team really has some good data on this. Not just energy, but water use, PV, and I'm sure maybe Aaron will share some of that later on in the presentation. But there's a great website with a Power BI interface that you can just kind of go in and look at different schools and look at averages. It's really great. So yes, please. There you go. So that's the first thing we did, right? So we said, okay, here's where you're at in a baseline format. And then like Aaron said, we've done the other schools. And so we've had some historical data on some of from the modeling that we've done on what we thought we could achieve with some of the designs that we achieved within the budgets of the bond measures, right? So we know what was achievable from a budget perspective. So we had that benchmark data. We looked at some of the Department of Energy prototype models. Then there were other schools that we've done, right? So we have a database of energy models and actual energy use from K-12 projects that we've done over the years. And so we pulled that data through. We looked at the ASHRAE net zero energy design guidelines. We looked at, Riley and NBI's the Getting to Zero Buildings database, which is awesome, right? Lots of data across the country. So we're not just looking at just Portland, we're looking at what people have done across the different school districts, different parts of the country. And that really helped us make these recommendations on what we think we can achieve. Forrest, you're muted.
Thanks, Ron. So, coming from all of the data of looking at, where we're at, we broke it out to see, based on the different programming, the different building types that PPS manages, what's the average or the median energy use intensity, and what do we see as realistic, achievable goals for these different types of new projects. So I think it's important that we make sure in setting these goals that they are actually attainable, and while still being aggressive and really pushing projects to be more sustainable. So with that lens, looking at new buildings, there's a lot of new construction going on, and a lot of these net zero ready schools that are being developed in our area and around the country. And so we were able to look at, what were those schools doing, and kind of set a standard for that, while still noting that, some different types of schools are going to be more energy intensive than others. A high school oftentimes has, certain energy intensities that are hard to manage, while still providing all of the services that the high school needs to provide. And then, while looking at the modernization projects, we looked at what projects we've done and projects around the country have done, and what EUIs they were able to achieve. And then we looked at, what were the systems that they implemented, and if we implemented a different type of system, how much further could we push that down. And an important piece of this, beyond setting these targets, and all these targets were, just looking through all the data and looking at where the energy use is really being driven, and what are the technologies that could address it, but also looking at, how are these projects being implemented, and what are the processes that are being put into place to make sure that energy efficiency is prioritized. So, in addition to the energy use intensity targets that we're setting within the standard, we're also setting these additional sustainability targets, and having the projects within the district, striving to achieve lead sustainability targets, which look at, sustainability more holistically, with energy being a large part of that, but also water and all of the other aspects of the sustainability development. Looking at, the movement towards all electric buildings, and the fact that with the greening of the grid, your building can become more sustainable over time if it's tied into the electric utility that is putting new renewable resources into their portfolio. And then obviously, pushing these projects to achieve the UI targets that we're setting out. So all of this was to set the stage, to give a framework that Aaron could then use to help push the projects forward, and as he noted previously, to provide guidance to the project managers and the design teams on ways to get to these targets. Aaron, leave that.
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. So a little bit more about the content. I mentioned before that coordination is key. So, and Rawan mentioned that we have, technical design standards and ed specs. So when we were going through this process, we were like, okay, well, how do we make sure all of this is aligned? Because, our current HVAC standards say that we must have natural gas fired boilers, and our sustainability standards were leaning towards, okay, let's put in heat pumps. So we're like, okay, we need to make sure that there's no conflicting language here. We actually ended up hiring PAE to come and update our MAP standards. So it was a really good alignment there since they were familiar with our sustainability standards. So we had to make sure that everything was aligned there. And we also wanted to make sure that it covered all types of projects and construction types. Next slide, please, Natalie. So the EUI targets, you saw that one was for new construction and rebuilds and another was for modernization. Just in case you're not familiar with the difference, a rebuild is a completely new building, and a modernization is you're using what you can from an existing school. So mainly you're using the shell, you're gutting it, you're adding all new equipment and utilities and insulation. Sometimes it gets new windows, sometimes it doesn't. So it's a little bit harder. Building orientation comes into play with those projects as well, since you're working with an existing structure. But for the types of projects, those two are managed by our Office of School Modernization, which is all bond funded. So we passed a bond most recently in November of 2020. We're on a 4-year cycle for our capital plan. But we also wanted to make sure that we had smaller projects covered. So there's a section in our standards that cover our small retrofits and upgrades, which we have a team of about 8 project managers in our facilities department that do those smaller projects that are non-bond funded. And then of course we have our maintenance and operations team, which are more the day-to-day work orders, smaller repairs, and building automation system and HVAC controls. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, back to our goals here one more time. This was really the driving force. I think when we established these goals, we weren't really sure exactly what the next step was. So this was kind of just the takeoff point for us, and then realizing, okay, if we're going to strategize to meet these goals, what does that look like? And that eventually became, okay, this is going into our design standards, which means every project needs to follow it, which means, as Rawan said, you either need to meet them, or you have to document a deviation from the standards, which needs to be signed off by a district representative. And for our larger projects on the bond side, they have what's called a design approval phase. And we are adding this into there. So basically at every design approval phase, they will need to get an updated EUI target in the design for that project. And if it's not meeting the target for that specific project, then they will need to go back and make adjustments in order to get to that target.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's presented. We can open up the floor now. We do have quite a bit of time left over for Q&A or any just comments that people want to make. I'd be especially interested to learn kind of like what stakeholders get really excited about when you start presenting these goals and these outcomes. What kind of catches people's attention and gets them invested in this process? I will throw that question to you, Aaron, first.
I mean, for me, it was more about, I was watching these projects go through the VE process and having that significantly impact our life cycle cost and our EUI and just our overall operation. So for the longest time, we were prioritizing upfront cost, as everyone on this call has probably have experience with that. But for me, it was like, okay, we really need to do something about this, not just from a sustainability perspective, but from a life cycle cost and just from an operations perspective. And I just was like, okay, well, we have all these standards in place for a reason. Why can't these be part of those necessary standards? So I was very passionate about that. And the stakeholder process was setting up virtual meetings with our internal teams. So we met with all of our bond project managers and all of our facilities project managers and said, hey, this is what this looks like. Do you have any questions? Do you have any feedback? We are anticipating a lot of pushback on like, okay, well, what does this do to our upfront costs on our projects? But you know, we got through it and got some good feedback, and you know, everyone eventually agreed to it, and now we have it adopted.
What about barriers during that process? Is there a place that you find kind of like a sticking point for conversations?
Yeah, a lot of it, I would say the biggest barrier was the upfront cost implications, which we kind of discussed as like a trade-off, right? So Riley had a slide about that. Whereas, okay, we're traditionally spending a lot more on mechanical and not as much on building envelope for our rebuilds and our modernization. So we can shift that cost a little bit. We can invest in the envelope a little bit more and then downsize mechanical. And so that we're not, you know, just over budget on these projects.
I just
don't know
put a resource. Oh, sorry, Aaron, don't mean to interrupt, but I did just
Oh yeah, go ahead.
in the chat that was developed this last year with NREL and DOE, and we helped a little bit to about plowing through that cost barrier, and it has a bunch of case studies of zero energy buildings and basically why you can't make any excuses. So as Aaron said, it's a lot about like prioritization and figuring things out, but it's been done. So resources like that really help with that cost barrier issue.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Aaron, like, I mean, you know, we have local examples where we've done that, right? In the K-12 sector, you know, Ellie, I don't think we go into those slides yet.
Oh,
That's for next
sorry.
time.
No. Thank
But
you.
yeah, so yes, I mean, we do have examples where we've been able to analyze the building energy use and work with the team really early on to balance the budgets, where we've been able to put more of the money towards the envelope, and like Riley said, you know, like tunnel through that cost barrier. You got to get to a point where you're dedicated enough to spend money on the envelope, where you can reduce the heating and cooling loads, which allow then you to reduce your HVAC system and thereby reducing the HVAC cost. Otherwise, if you're not dedicated enough to get there, you're only adding costs to the envelope and the HVAC system, and it's not gonna pencil out.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time in our stakeholder meeting with the project managers talking about that, and especially in the, you know, for the bond projects where we're either rebuilding a school or completely gutting a school, that's your opportunity to upgrade the envelope. That's your one time to get in there, beef up the insulation, get new windows, new roof and everything, really get everything sealed, you know, caulking and sealing, weather stripping, all that. So, you know, we're schools, we're going to be here for 50 to 100 years. So we know that that's our one opportunity to really get that done. Whereas a mechanical system will last, you know, 15 to 30 years. So it was a really good point that we were trying to drive home during that stakeholder meeting.
Hey, Aaron, there was a question on the Power BI.
Yeah, so question in the chat from Alice. Does the Power BI app sync with Energy Star Portfolio Manager for data feed, or using different energy management systems? So I am providing raw data in an Excel format, which you could, if you're using Energy Star, you could download it from there and then submit it. So we work with a third party that manages this for us, and I just give them an Excel sheet that's an automatic report monthly. So you could use Portfolio Manager or any other reporting software that has a Excel download option.
it's a good point to make too, that I'll just throw in there, that, having some sort of outward facing reporting, or even just benchmarking your energy data in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, or I've seen the full gamut, like people have kitted out their Google spreadsheets. Just having that already puts you so far ahead to reducing energy, carbon, all of the above, water. So Aaron, by putting this in a forward-facing benchmarking format, is kind of taking that next step. But I would encourage the districts that are not doing that yet to benchmark your energy data, put it in Portfolio Manager. It's cheap. In fact, it's free. And that's just a great first step. There's lots of different options.
Yeah, and the great thing about this dashboard is it's customizable, so we can add pages to it. And so as we move down the line with our goals and we're reporting out on our progress towards our goals, we imagine building out separate pages on here to visualize that.
Looks like we have another question in the chat talking about getting sustainability into the curriculum and how facilities managers and curriculum writers can work together to make those teachable moments.
Yeah, this one's tough. I work in facilities, and I think most school districts are pretty siloed in their departments that way. I will say that the climate justice curriculum development has really helped to bridge that gap. So we have cross-departmental meetings once a month that involves staff that are working on that curriculum, our career technical education team, nutrition services, our student engagement team, and then my sustainability team and facilities. And we meet just to kind of touch base on everything and make sure that we can figure out how to align our work and where we can work together. I will say it's still a little bit of a struggle. It's still a little bit of like, okay, there are a lot of things going on. How do we fit it all together? So I wouldn't say that we're an expert in that, but we're trying. It is a significant barrier, the connection between facilities and curriculum.
Aaron, are you working with your career pathways people at all to make the facility connection?
Yeah. So they're in touch with our career technical education team. So that's how we're connected to them.
Yeah, don't we have something at Benson where those students are doing a PV array on the roof or testing or out or something like that?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, we see that, in other places. Andy, I totally see your hand up, so I will get to you in 2 seconds. I'm almost done. But we work with other organizations that do the career path for high school students. It can be trickier or easier for younger kids. Younger kids, you can turn them into energy monitors and things like that to make that tie and just have their little checklist every single day. However, you can also have high school students, as Ruwan was just alluding to, checking PV or effectively being facility managers. And there's one program that we work with in another state called Climate Action Pathways, and they are paying high school students to be facility managers effectively. They've saved I think it was I'm totally going to misquote this, and maybe I can do a fact check, an armchair expert type fact check after this, but it's something like $800,000 for their district just being there to be able to be the paid energy monitors. So there's different ways. The most successful ones I've seen are through career pathways. And Andy totally has his hand up, so I'm going to just call on him like a teacher.
I was good at putting it down. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Aiden. I work at Portland General Electric, and thank you for this, first of all, for this forum. This is really great. As a parent, I've got my son over my shoulder who's doing his third grade routine right now. So I think a lot of us are eager that kids are getting back to school. That is a question I wanted to ask, and since it came up, I wanted to hear maybe what people are thinking about with respect to maybe indoor air quality and especially COVID right now. I know Portland Public has some stuff going on there, but that wasn't the intention of me raising my hand. So maybe that could be on the back burner. The thing I wanted to carry on what you said about the workforce connections, I think that's really huge. what I've seen is, like, for example, PGE, I think, started an IRP style integration with like high school physics, where they would go teach our integrated resource plan from the utility point of view to a high school physics classroom. But then I think, Aaron, you're talking about what was that called? The Climate Justice Initiative and things, which I know is like a confluence of funders. So PGE helps fund that, as well as other, I think, philanthropy organizations. But I would say there's also some groups, to your point, Riley, on having students, especially high school age, be in charge of sort of more hands-on stuff. The Lane Community College and University of Oregon partnership is really interesting. So if people don't know, they have an EPA grant, I think, or maybe it's DOE. I think it's DOE actually, to do like they call it the Western States Building Energy and Controls Apprenticeship. And so that's more for the graduating seniors to go into like a pre-apprenticeship track and to go into either a trade school or a community college track. But definitely, you know, having a seat myself on the East Metro STEAM partnership in Portland, we work mostly with K-12, but also community college and up to, you know, helping those students get into like a four-year university and that type of thing. So there's a lot of, you know, activity going on. I think the bigger challenge is all of us in the professional seats linking up and then being earnest on the follow-up, because we all have so many day jobs or so many tasks in our day job. It's easy to say, oh, that doesn't really fall on my plate, or this is whatever. But so what gets me excited as a stakeholder, not only from the utility perspective, but also as a parent and as a person trying to volunteer for the schools, is like, how do we use these high performance building designs to really optimize the learning environment for kids, and indoor air quality, and also just lighting and all of the other stuff, which the science is telling us is super important for how kids can actually learn when we're shoving information down them. You know, not that that's the image, like, but you know what I mean. And so I'll leave it there. Graham, I totally sent you an email, so check that, because we chatted privately, and I think that would be a cool Oregon Washington thing with maybe University of Oregon and UW as kind of galvanizing students. I think the high school students are great for that, but if we can get undergraduates or graduates to mentor the high school students, that's another promising pathway, which actually has a lot of NSF funding if we want to get aggressive. So thank you, though. I'm going to stop there because I think there's I could go on, and I won't do that today. I do that before. For people who know me, I'm easy to do that.
Well, thanks for your input, Andy. And you know, those are kind of the types of things we talk about at that cross-departmental meeting, and we're kind of always pushing at that North Star of like, how do we use all of this and everything we're doing on the facilities and sustainability side, and how do we use that in the classroom and use it as like, you know, real like learning tool. So we're trying to get there, and we're doing it slowly, project by project, as we're building new schools and going through LEED and, you know, getting those educational features in there, whether that's a dashboard or signage or something like that. So it's a slow process, but we're moving towards that direction.
Yeah, and I remember, Aaron, we talked a while back when I was at Energy Trust, and I know you had always mentioned that gap of like the facilities people you're working with, and then the curriculum is the other angle that you know, for that classroom learning experience. So we have another example. I'll throw it in the chat maybe, but there's a civics and science school in Portland that has done some like student walkthroughs. That's a K-8 as well. So like they do some walkthroughs with like energy planning and architecture, but they have like an architect on their board. So like, you know, it's kind of serendipitous like that sometimes, but I'd love to also just hear. Anyways, I won't ask another question. I could, like I said, I'll stop there. But Aaron, appreciate all the work you've done. I think that Power BI thing is a indicative of like, if you've been in this for a while, trying to make sense of it and keep things floating. And so now with all the people on the call, I'm really hopeful that we're turning a corner and that these standards are going to, I think, lead the way towards that new future.
That's the plan. There was another question here from Chris talking about aggregating the 1.5% green energy technology, which is Oregon state mandate for public buildings. So I'm not going to give too much away on that because that is part 2 of this panel. So we will get into the details, but we do cover that as part of the standards. So that's your plug to join us for the next one.
Looks like there's another question too, just kind of some examples of the sustainability signage. And I would just say that a lot of that signage is really just using what is built, using the building as a learning tool, so that when students and whoever the public is coming through the building, you can start to learn about the environment that you're in and what's happening around you. And I think it's such a great tool to be able to learn more about your environment. I'm seeing some more.
Andrew here,
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe. Also, Bailey, I sent you a quick chat. I'll send you a couple examples that I think are fabulous.
Yeah, I can address Andrew's question about pursuing LEED certification versus doing net zero ready. So we're kind of doing both. We've historically done LEED certification way before these standards were adopted. We decided to keep it because we find that when projects are actually bound by requirements, they get it done. We have had a lot of discussions internally on, well, should we just build to LEED certification standards but not actually get certified? But we figured there would be some corners cut, there would be a VE process around that. So we wanted to make sure that that was kept in there and that it was a visible part of our goals and our requirements. We do have another section. I don't want to give too much away about the details because like I said, we're covering that next time, but we do have a section that talks about Energy Trust and their, what was previously their Path to Net Zero program. So we will be covering that next time too. So we do require our projects to enroll in that program.
And I know Alice asked about decarb. Hey, Alice, I love that you're on this call. It's amazing. We are reaching into different states. Alice asked about decarb and transitioning away from fossil fuels. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next one. We even have, I wouldn't call it like a full decarb case study, but it's a good one.
Yeah, and that's something that we decided needs to come from the board. So that needs to be a higher level board decision. We didn't want to put in our design standards like, we must decarbonize because it reaches across much more than just construction. So we are developing a board policy right now that'll tackle, the broader goals of going carbon neutral.
But I will say, as we show, like in modernizations and all new buildings, the standard does require all electric buildings. So we are, wanting to transition away from gas for heating, domestic water, and so on, right? It does become a little bit tougher for renos to get there, and hot water, heat pumps for hot water heating. It's been done before. We do it all the time. Heat pumps for domestic hot water, same thing. Systems are out there. I think the kitchen load becomes a little bit of a discussion, and then any other process loads also become a discussion. We've done certainly we've done commercial kitchens with induction heating, induction cooktops, but I would not say that I've done a school that way. So it is a discussion to be had.
We actually got approval from our nutrition services department that they're okay with electric kitchens. So we are good to go on that.
Oh,
That's
good.
huge.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Congratulations. Group clap for
Yes.
that. That would be one of the key stakeholders you need to win over.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the mechanical shop. I think that's actually a tougher one, tougher barrier.
We still have 5 minutes here. Y'all have any other questions? I love it. Congrats coming in. Feel free to just unmute yourselves and pop in. I know it's kind of awkward sometimes, but go for it.
I just threw a plug again in the chat with a link to the U of O team who just won the second in a row solar decathlon for green or whatever it was, net zero schools. But they had a focus to bring in a emphasis on racial justice and paired up with the Albina Vision team in Portland. So at I think it was MLK Junior School. I'm not sure where that's located, but there was also a lot of work with this, I guess, for broader PPS coordination, Aaron. But I mean, I know there was some work done at Harriet Tubman to look at ventilation and like proximity to the highway. And so and they put those like moon looking ventilation systems on there that are just like, I don't know, those look ginormous. So like, and when I talked with Elliot Gall from PSU, and they were part of the mechanic, my son is cracking up on his reading, I guess. I asked them, did you have a chance to really square the energy use with the ventilation requirements? And they said, no, that was like on our wish list, but the timeline to reopen Harriet Tubman was such that it just like had to go forward. So they always said like, hey, next time it would be great if we could work again with PPS. So if Elliot Gall is kind of mechanical engineering at PSU. So there's some cool things that we could do, I think, with the universities in the area and with PAE's leadership and the New Buildings Institute. I mean, this is a rock star team. So I just want to take again a moment to like appreciate everybody's expertise and time and dedication to this.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to thank all of our presenters today, and thank you to everybody who's attended. I threw a link in the chat for the next presentation coming up on May 20th, so about a month from today. And yeah, we would love to see you there. Would any of our presenters have any closeout comments or?
Happy Earth Day.
Yeah, happy Earth Day.
Yeah,
I'm
happy
loving all
Earth
the
Day.
positive vibes on this chat. This is like the most active chat
This
I've
was
seen in a
awesome.
while, and it's pretty awesome. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks all.